My name is Marius Dragomir. I am the director of the Center for Media, Data and Society, which is a research center at the Central European University. And I'm here today with
Minna Aslama, Horowitz from the University of Helsinki.
We are here to present the results of a recent research project that we have conducted together about media capture and its context. And what we have been trying to do was to develop a comparative framework for public service media. But before doing that, I just wanted to define, to say a few words about media capture and why we focused on that. The main and the most obvious reason is the fact that media capture is probably at the moment the biggest threat to independent journalism and to editorial independence in the media in general. And that is why we believe that it is worth, and this is in fact really important to study this phenomenon. But just trying to define the phenomenon, media capture is essentially a situation in which the media can no longer function independently, but is controlled by vested interests. It has been researched as a concept and empirical phenomenon in various contexts, but the capture of public service media has been less analyzed, although media organizations with a public service mandate are also increasingly facing pressures from both the government and the commercial competitors alike. So what we are trying to do in this presentation is to propose a way to assess the impact of media capture on public service media organizations in different national contexts. The framework presented highlights the importance of both media systems and public discourses in understanding the forms in which public service media capture can emerge and manifest. What we want to stress is that in this presentation we will focus on explaining the model rather than on detailed empirical analysis, but of course we'll illustrate the model with a few case countries.
Yes, and we're very eager to hear your comments and critique as well on how do you think the model works. But the reason why we wanted to engage in this was that we found out that there are so many different academic as well as applied analysis of independent country case studies, less comparative work. And that is, of course, challenging because we can think about different media systems and then especially the role of public service broadcasting that is often so very national. Could those be even compared? That's been always a challenge for public media scholars. However, we do know that in young PSM countries as well as in mature PSM countries, there are certain pressures that seem relatively similar. Interestingly enough, a lot of political pressure, often from populist politics, is a common thread, as well as, of course, digitalization and the kind of impact it has had in commercial competitors, and then that spills over to the big debates, as we all know, about the legitimacy of public service and distortion of the market and so on and so forth. So as Anja Schifrin famously has said, we do need frameworks where this kind of special but then general can be compared, and we can see how specific context impact media capture, but perhaps, and this is what we hope, we can also find some common threads and perhaps even some common solutions at some point.
In the elements that we took into consideration in our research, we looked at three things, and I will start from the beginning from the end of the slide. One is the structural capture of the media, and this is building on a model that we have developed at our center with our colleagues, but also with other partners in different parts of the world. A model of media capture that is based on four key components. One is regulatory capture, and this is when governments, authorities control the regulatory authorities in the country. The second is the use of state financing, and this is when governments are using public funding to fund media outlets with the goal of controlling them. Ownership takeover is the situation in which usually oligarchs or other large companies in cooperation with authorities are taking over private media companies. And the fourth element is the control of public service media, which is the main focus of our research. Such control is usually in most of the countries secured through control of governing structures and the funding of public service media. So this is one element that we took into consideration in our analysis, and the other two are that we thought are important to include, to have a more complex and more nuanced view of the state of public service media are, on the one hand, the media system, and secondly, the public discourses. When it comes to media system, we believe that a fundamental dimension, it is a fundamental dimension to address when assessing media capture and public service media. And when it comes to public discourses, we thought that it's the notion of cultural capture was very helpful here, and we thought that this has to be included to understand which parts of society, which players in the market are against or speaking against public service media. But we'll talk now more in detail about these elements.
So this, I guess, is self-explanatory. We chose 5 countries in Europe to test our model, and we wanted them to be different in terms of media systems. And we took the good old Hallin and Mancini, but more of a contemporary reiteration of it. And so Brückemann et al. And some other work have taken some statistical indicators to compare different media systems, and they've actually found 5 different clusters in Europe. And we found that starting from that kind of understanding, and especially Hallin and Mancini really basing their ideas of these different media systems into sort of the interplay between media and political power, we thought that this would be a proper way to sort of frame our different media systems. So in sum, very quickly, we have Belgium, in which, despite of linguistic diversity and sort of diverse organizational configurations, public service media has a very strong role. In the Czech Republic, interestingly enough, in a very highly captured media environment, public service media still has a relatively strong standing. Finland, right there, extremely strong roots, extremely powerful players still. In the COVID spring, 90% of Finns trusted the Finnish broadcasting company. Then we have Spain. Many of us know relatively highly captured and public service media, but a very significant national and regional player it still is. And then, of course, the iconic BBC in the UK. Need I say more?
Yes. Well, when it comes to moving on to the cultural discourse, the public discourse about the role of the public service media, on the one hand, we found some similarities, and some of them are quite obvious. One of them is the fact that, and it's stemming from the politicization of public service media, is the fact that political parties in opposition usually tend to be critical of public service media for the simple reason that they don't have access to this media at a certain moment in time. But in spite of such similarities, the discourses about public service media that we looked at in these countries entail a great variety. When reviewed in context, we found that they deepened the understanding of the role of public service media, and also highlighted a number of ongoing tensions. You can find in our research in more detail this analysis, but very quickly, in Belgium we haven't found a track record of concerted attacks on the role and operation of public service media, although voices critical of its funding model are rising. In the Czech Republic, there is a strong anti-public service media campaign coming from private media outlets, which we have seen also increasing in the UK. In Finland, as well as in other Nordic countries, the public service media, despite of strong traditions, there is also a tradition to criticize the role of public service media more as a standard political question. And as Minna said, in Spain, the highly politicized public service media draws a lot of criticism, of course, from the opposition, but also from the journalists working for for this public service media because of the censorship attempts. In the UK, critical voices of the BBC have increased, but with the current crisis and the increased demand for good content, they have been tempered for a while. We'll come back to that in a minute.
So when we look at the structural capture and the different forms of it, and kind of connecting back to what Marius just said, to the discursive capture and the media systems even, just to highlight some of the similarities and the kind of, at the same time, the diversity of capture. So in Spain, we know there's a blatant case of political capture. What is important to note that those critical discursive voices by the opposition parties and then the private media echoing that, those are actually describing a real situation. So not necessarily preceding undermining of the role of public service media. In the UK, with the iconic BBC, while perhaps we all have thought that the status of the BBC cannot really be challenged that much, the past decade or so, obviously we've seen the intensifying series of efforts to undermine the role of BBC, both from the power of powerful businesses associated with some of the largest private media, as well as the Boris Johnson premiership time hasn't been very good for the BBC. And then the danger resides specifically in the plans of alter the BBC funding mechanism, which is not unique to the challenges to public service media around Europe.
Yes, and well, conclusions. So what did we find out? It's important, and it's clear that we have created this framework and we have conducted this research during the COVID-19 crisis. So a lot of the analysis and a lot of the impact is linked to that. But what we can say is that the public service media is currently in a very paradoxical situation. On the one hand, the value of public service media has been rediscovered. The pandemic is likely to temper, for example, or even mute the plans to disrupt the BBC's funding model because of that. But at the same time, I think we believe and we see evidence of that the public service media will continue to face changing markets, and will continue to be impacted by technology advances, and at the same time will continue to be faced with antagonistic political voices. At the same time, there are various types of impact on public service media that are triggered by the crisis, and one of them, again going back to the UK, is the harsher economic conditions, which are already forcing an increasing number of households to stop paying the license fee, which is the model that BBC was based on in all its existence. So these are very important trends, and we have managed, thanks to this framework, to look into this and to try to understand what are the areas of threat in the future. But what we want to conclude with, and linking also with how we started and with the importance of analyzing and understanding media capture, is that this framework, we hope, will provide a model of analyzing the main threats to public service media, and can be useful not only for researchers and academics to really understand these trends, but we really hope that it can be used and can be developed into a more practical tool that can be used, for example, for policymakers, journalists who care about the idea of public service media, or who even work for these institutions, to really understand where the capture is coming from, how it is manifested, and what can be done to actually combat that.
Yes, thank you very much. Let us know what you think about the model. We're very much looking forward to your comments.
Thank you very much.